Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the World Football Summit. Please take your seats. Que tomen sus asientos, por favor. It is now time for our first keynote here at the World Football Summit. Ahora pasamos al primer discurso que vamos a escuchar aquí en este World Football Summit. And with us today, it is our great honor to have a representative of a team who've started their defense of the Scudetto perfectly. 5 wins out of 5 after beating Frosinone away from home 2-0 last night. It is, of course, Juventus. And, of course, Juventus also did a very, very interesting bit of transfer business over the summer. Our speaker will conduct a question and answer session with the audience after he has presented to us. Please welcome to the stage the president of Juventus and the European Clubs Association. Bienvenido a este escenario el presidente de la Juventus y de la Asociación de Clubes Europeos. Damos la bienvenida a Andrea Agnelli.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Señoras y señor, buenos días. Es un placer para mí estar aquí hoy, pero como hay mucha gente que viene de todo el mundo, voy a hablar en inglés hoy, pero es un placer para mí estar aquí en España, en Madrid, al World Football Summit. So as I just said, it's a pleasure for me to be here today addressing you at the third edition of the World Football Summit. It's over 2,400 professionals from our industry joining for a couple of days here in Madrid, so I trust it's going to be a tremendous event, fruitful, where we can gather, learn from one another, because our industry is one that keeps developing. They gave me as a topic for my speech absolutely nothing, and they left it in my hands. So I hope I'm not going to bore you with what I thought I was going to address you with. Obviously and evidently, whenever I have these opportunities of sharing my thoughts about the football industry in general, it is something I actually appreciate very much to be able to share and actually engage with you from the audience and get some questions from the floor, because I think it is from that element especially that one actually learns the most, I get to learn the most, and hopefully by talking to each other, by sharing thoughts, we can actually have a better understanding. I am not here to give you a unique vision. I think as we are, the football industry is very diverse, it's full of stakeholders, different interests, whether from inside, from outside agencies. So I think it's always good to actually be able to challenge each other and come up to a common solution. Obviously, the perspective I will be delivering to you guys is going to be a club's perspective. I not only have the honor to chair Juventus FC, one of the most successful teams in Europe, and part of our family ownership since 1923, making us the longest lasting ownership of any sports franchise globally. But I will also be addressing you in my role as ECA chairman, which I've been elected last September. So my view, my angle, my perspective, it's obvious and evidently a club's perspective. And what is the biggest topic that we've been talking about in the last months, or at least since President Schäffering took chair as UEFA chairman? It's competitive balance. You know, competitive balance is something that we always talk. We want the beautiful game to showcase games that are uncertain, to showcase games, you know, that bring and leave the pathos all the way till the end of the game. Competitive balance is great as a single element, but then it becomes very, very difficult to define competitive balance. I mean, obviously, UEFA has a point of view, the leagues have a different point of view, us clubs have a point of view, but it is absolutely very difficult to actually define it. As I look down the history of football, and I'll start somewhere down in the 70s and 80s, there was an element of competitive balance. There was obviously more successful teams, both on and off the pitch, And this has kind of moved forward as the industry was evolving. I mean, it is my belief that if I look at football in the 70s and 80s, one of the biggest discriminating factor was the metropolitan size of where the club played. By metropolitan size, I actually mean, could the city, could the urban area afford a 40, 50, 60, 70,000 stadium and could actually bring together that amount of fans week in, week out in the various games? If it could, it meant that that club could have been successful, both on and off the pitch. The main source of revenues, obviously and evidently, was ticket sales. So, I mean, it was stadium revenues, something that is a constant throughout the times. That was the biggest discriminating factor. And obviously, that means that you have countries and big cities would have been a discriminating factor in those days. And if you go down and you look at the winners, by any chance, of Champions League or the Champions Cup, as it was called back then, you do find teams that you wouldn't find anymore today, or it's much more difficult to find today. Glasgow, Belgrade, Bucharest. And I talk about cities and not just about clubs, because it means that within that country, in most occasions, the capital city of a specific country, a club would have had a determined specific advantage vis-à-vis their peers in their countries, and therefore having a chance of moving forward in European Cups, be it the Champions Cup, be it the Cup Winners' Cup, or be it the then UEFA Cup. What happens then as we move forward? We leave the 70s, we leave the 80s behind. Obviously, we have some important regulations coming into place. The Bosman case clearly made a big difference because the trading of players was left only individually in the hands of clubs until that date. That means freedom of movement for the players and the introduction of free agents. But mostly what happens in the transitioning of the 90s, it's the introductions of pay TVs. So even when I was a kid, all I could do was play football with my friends on a Sunday afternoon. I would have the radio on. At 6 o'clock, we had 45 minutes, one half of a game that we didn't know which one was going to be broadcasted by the national broadcasters. And then at 6:15, 6:30 more or less, we would have had the highlights of the game. As the pay TVs come in, we start seeing a different discriminating factor. So what happens is not anymore countries and big cities, as any country will have a big city, will have a capital city when we look across Europe. The discriminating factor becomes markets, so big markets. So big cities in big markets will have the competitive advantage and will have the discriminating factor. So that is what we saw. We saw countries with great football heritage. And I think about Holland, I think about Ajax, and I think about extraordinary team in the 70s that went on to win 3 consecutive Champions Leagues. I think about Scottish football, I think about Celtic, I think about Portugal, I think about Benfica, I think about tremendous histories and stories of football, tremendous countries, tremendous heritage that suddenly kind of slowly die. Why? Because they haven't got the market size. Simply, Portugal, Scotland, and Holland, and I take these 3 examples, do not have the market size to compete with Germany, England, Italy, Spain, or France. So the big fives, as we know them today, they actually just come out of a technological breakthrough, which is a different way of broadcasting, which is a different way of investing in a market. So no matter in what industry you are involved, and in our case, from our family business perspective, I can take cars to give you an example. I mean, obviously, the attention that we will dedicate to England, Germany, Italy, France, and Spain, it's bigger than the other countries, simply because you have more people, more spending capacity, and more margins to be achieved. And that was a tremendous breakout. That means that broadcasters started heavily investing in football, shifting much of the financial capacities towards those big countries. As we all know it, initially the rights, as it came out, it was something that was negotiated individually by clubs, and it then followed through with Spain being the last one now a few years back to collectivize those rights and introducing mandatory distribution systems. In some countries, evidently, this happened through the FA or the organizing league. In other countries, it happened through a state law, and that is the case of Spain, as we are right now, or Italy, where I'm coming from. Or I take the benchmark and the best in class, England, it was the Premier League that started collectivizing the rights and selling English football globally since 20 years. So that is something that changed the panorama of competitive football and competitive balance. So obviously, if I have access to a bigger market, I will have access to bigger resources, and that will distort competitive balance across European football, leaving the best potentials to the few clubs. And that's what happens in the last couple of years. What we saw is that this sovereignty of some clubs sticks in the hands of few clubs. And if I think about Spain, I think about Real Madrid, I think about Barcelona and Atletico Madrid, I think about PSG in France, I think about Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund in Germany. In Italy, I think about Juventus, and I think AC Milan and Inter Milan should have just the same capacity because of what they represent in Italy. And we have a little bit more choice in England because of the way of their distribution system. It didn't allow for a total breakout of a few clubs, but you have Man U, City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, Tottenham, just to name a few. The other markets, those great stories of football, those great stories of football heritage, have practically disappeared. I mean, we actually saw Ajax having a tremendous Europa League campaign a year back. But that is pretty much what they can. All they can aspire to today is group stage Champions League, maybe moving through 1 or 2 extra knockout stages. And this is actually a reality that we're living at the moment. In this construction, we started to see some important power games also about the leagues. Leagues are starting to compete with each other. So when I think about the Bundesliga, when I think about the Premier, when I think about La Liga, when I think Liga and Serie A, and excuse me if I stick to this ones, but that is where I see the most of the attempted influence by leagues, it is how to get some advantages for their specific leagues. England, as you all know, took a very head start back in the 90s with 20 years of collective rights distributed globally. England also has a great advantage, and that is one, very obvious, the language. Whenever they build up a product before and after the game, they speak a language that everybody understands, which is difficult for us here in Spain or us in Italy. You know, our interviews are carried out in Italian, difficult to understand. So when you're watching something subtitled, is not as interesting as something that comes out in a language that you directly understand. And secondly, obviously, even back in the 90s, they worked from a very important commercial platform, which is the Commonwealth countries, which brought them to the level of overall domestic and international incomes where they are today. What is fascinating is the international rights that they've developed in time, creating furthermore more distortions in competitive balance. Now, let's go back and analyze what happens to the countries that I was telling you about before, such as Holland, such as Scotland, such as Portugal. Do those teams, the value of the rights of those national competitions within their countries, most of the times are sold for less than the Premier League. So that is an element of distortion of competitive balance, because having created a dominant position, and by all means, they deserved it, and they have done a tremendous job. So this is a comment which actually underlines the great vision that Richard Scudamore had in developing the Premier League, and it's something, whatever, that I underline are positive comments, but they obviously create further competitive balance issues. And then it takes us to the 2010s, so the actual years that we are living at the moment. The 2010s, they saw the introduction of digital media. They're seeing the introduction of OTT. They're seeing the introductions of social platforms. And more than yesterday, we still keep on talking about competitive balance and what is the role of leagues, of clubs, of international and national competitions. What happened in the 2010s to date, or if I look at this from the mid-90s today, football has had a tremendous growth when I look at about aggregate data. So when we look at the UEFA reports, the aggregate data of European football are astonishing. So mid-90s to my data, it's down to 2016. the compound average growth rate of European football has been 10% average, having gone through one of the biggest crises, one of the biggest financial crises of the last 100 years back in 2007. And that has been both on aggregate of the club's revenues, on aggregate of obviously evidently of the leagues, and if you look at the various steps of the UEFA cycles of our international competitions, one year to the next, obviously when they talk about a new cycle, the increase is greater, but when you look about the compound average growth in the last 15 years, it's been around 10%. Impressive, absolutely impressive data. But then the impact that these various revenue streams have on different clubs coming from different associations are evidently totally different. So we always hear, or I hear a lot about the fact that UEFA competition distort the competitive balance. Well, yes, they do, to a certain extent, because only a few teams can actually access the UEFA competition, while most of us, if not all of us, participate at our domestic level. But when you look at the way and you analyze the various P&Ls and balance sheets of the clubs, when you take the big five or association 6 to 20, so another 15 associations, another 15 leagues, the impact of UEFA, it's only around 15%, so 10% of the revenues in the big five and about 15% of the revenues of 6 to 20. What makes a huge difference in our profits statements is domestic rights in association 1 to 5, and that's evident, is exactly what I told you a second ago. But when you look at association 6 to 20, because of the markets, small markets, the domestic broadcasting is not that high and only accounts for about 20%. What still drives the business is association 6 to 20. It's match days, stadiums, just like once upon a time, and obviously and evidently the ability to grow commercial revenues, be them the main sponsors, the technical sponsors, the sponsors around, or the various aspects. This is how much it impacts. When you move down the ladder and you look at association 21 to 37 and beyond, there, yes, if one team participates in only 1 or 2 qualifying games to the competitions of the following year, those revenues, which are in the region of the tens of thousands, if not just 100, 200,000 euros, completely distort the P&L of a specific club in a specific country, generating some competitive balance issues. But when you look about association 1 to 20, the impacts are the impacts of UEFA competitions are absolutely not there. And more, if I look about what happened, when you talk about the issues that we have to address, the big clubs, the clubs that earn too much, what has been driving, the commercial growth of the teams I've nominated a few seconds ago, such as Juventus, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Manchester United, to name a few, took about the top 12 by revenues. So out of the 18 billions of overall turnover in European football, 6 billion back in 2010, so 1/3 of the revenues was grasped by the top 12 teams, and these being the teams I just said. If I look at what happened and how they actually grew until 2016, they grew almost 50%. So they grew from 6 to 8.8 billions. And much of that growth has been driven by commercial and others, with domestic TV being reduced from 29% incidence to 25%, and UEFA stable at 10%. That means the difference that domestic broadcast and international broadcast has brought to the P&L of the top teams has been marginal to the growth they actually had. Why is that? Well, in the 2010s, as I started this particular moment, it's about digital media, it's about OTT, it's about social platforms. How to engage is about regional sponsorship. So to us, what's fundamental is the actual exposure we can actually gain on a global stage. Some, obviously, have done better than others. Again, the Premier League has a distribution which is astonishing compared to Serie A. If I look at the work that the president of La Liga has done in the past few years since the rights have been collectivized, has done a tremendous job in exposing La Liga to international audiences, exploiting a brand within a brand, El Clásico. So would it have been possible 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even just 5 years ago, to think in Spain that El Clásico would have been played the 22nd of December at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if I'm not mistaken, 1 o'clock? It would have been a heresy in Spain. But for commercial purposes, I mean, they moved the game, such as El Clásico, played just before Christmas at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock on a holiday, on a Sunday, it means global exposure. It means you're in prime time in Asia Pacific, all of Europe following you, and you're early morning in the United States market. That means globally, that product can be seen by the whole world. So hats off to the work that Tebas has done in Spain in the past couple of years, because it has really brought another league onto the global stage. For different reasons, obviously, Liga, Bundesliga and Serie A. Serie A was probably the center stage 20 years ago. It is not there at the moment. It's not, I don't want to get into this. Today we see two dominant leagues. We see the Premier League and we see La Liga in terms of growth potential. And then we have the other three with the rest of the world, strolling behind. The question that we should be asking ourselves, or that we ask ourselves, that I ask myself on a daily basis, is where are we going from here? Having seen what happened at the industry since the 70s to date, we must be able to develop a vision to what's going to happen to the football industry in the next 5 to 10 years and in the next 20 to 30 years to try at least and have an understanding of where we can go. 2024, as I've been on the records recently, to us it's the very first date that carries great meaning and significance. To that date, the international match calendar, which is released by FIFA, is being approved by all the confederations, by all the federations, so we know exactly what's going to happen, when we are going to release our players, when you have confederation tournaments, when you have the World Cup, so on and so forth, with the first World Cup ever in the winter window in Qatar in 2022. So to me, short term, even though it's going to happen in 2024, which is in the football industry, seems like a geological era away, the 2024 international match calendar is the first thing that we have to tackle. And when I say international match calendar, is actually understanding how this is made. At the moment, you have confederation tournaments which are played odd years, even years, summer windows, winter windows. One thing is aligning these. And when I mean aligning this, is I'd like to see, or we'd like to see as clubs, confederation tournaments be played on even years every 4 years. Because the odd years, so the 19s, was not going to be 19s, the 25s, the 27s, I think we have to think of moments where players can have a rest, a proper 4-week rest period. And I'm saying this in the interest of all. The players are exceptionals, they're not machines. And even if they were to be machines, they are brought to a level, they're easy to break. Our football players today are like Formula One machines. If you actually use them too much, or they're actually not well regulated, they just break. They're extraordinary, but they need those rest periods. We would like to be talking about, with FIFA and the Confederation, also on the release windows. Currently, we have been successful in putting only 9 release windows in a 2-year cycle leading to a competition. To us, it would be easy, it would be important to actually see if we could see and what happens in the September, October, November release windows. I mean, we as clubs, we as employers, we see our players taken away every 4 or 5 weeks in September, October, November, March and June. Now, it is clear in a real world, in a realpolitik world, that we are not going to release the FA's games. So the games that they have will remain the games they're going to have. But if we can actually rationalize this, and for example, have 3 games played in a September release, and 3 games played in a November release, and an anticipated release from June within the spring calendar, it would certainly rationalize this. And it would leave us with the last game of the year, with the pinnacle of the season being Champions League final and Europa League final. After that break, everybody goes on holiday, or everybody goes to play either Euro, Copa America, African Cup, or the World Cup. So the pinnacle is end of international and the great confederation tournament, but not just a small release windows. What we'd like to see, and this is evident for all the reasons I've said before, is we'd like to see, as clubs, a recalibration of international versus domestic games. Again, let's go back and understand how the P&L of Association 1 to 20 is made, with a greater incidence coming from match day and commercial to all the teams. It is evident that to the first 3, 4, 5 teams of the first 20 association, a greater brand exposure to a greater audience, to greater markets, would actually help them develop their business model. And that is, if we look at the first 4 or 5 teams in 20 associations, we are talking about 100 teams. We're not talking about a million teams. So that is how we would like to create value. And that is why, 2021-24, we are in the process of debating and with UEFA the introduction of a third competition. So participation is very important to most of the teams in top European leagues. And we've analyzed the potential creation of expansion of the Europa League from the current 48 to 64. But we've evaluated that that would have destroyed commercial value and would have confused various audiences. So that would have been by reducing from 48 to 32 and adding a third competition of 32, so an extra 16 teams that will come from that central bulk of teams I was just naming, you would find, one, greater participation for those teams who can actually expand their brands. They can actually play international games from September onwards, and if they're good, qualify, go through to knockout stage, and win an international competition, which is certainly great, but also expanding the participation. Since I've said this in Split a couple of weeks ago, people have been asking themselves, what is the commercial sense of this that you're trying to do? We certainly do not understand it, given that today Europa League struggles commercially vis-à-vis Champions League. Well, it is difficult to see commercial value in this proposal because there is very little commercial value to look into a third-tier competition. But sometimes we also want to listen to our fellow club members to the fact that they want to participate more. As I said, their business model is commercial and match days. The fact of participating at international games, it would allow them to grow, and it would allow them to showcase their players going forward in a different way than just by playing in domestic leagues. By reducing the Europa League, yes, there's some extra commercial value should actually be created because the competition becomes more qualitative, leaving Champions League as the gold, the top diamond of the pyramid. And that would be obviously extremely interesting. Last but not least, for the reason I said before, we'd like to see an overall reduction of games. Today, if I talk about the top 5 leagues, we go from countries that have a club playing from a potential maximum of 53 games to another country that goes from a potential maximum of 43 games. That means between a potential maximum of one another, there are 10 games difference, which is huge. So when you're addressing competitive balance, you want to make sure you also harmonize the element of number of games played by players, irrespectively of the association, the league they play in. What is very important to us, and why it is dear to my heart when I bring forward these comments, it is that when I look at the cluster of the stakeholders of the football industry, I see a lot of people that are extremely comfortable in this industry because they carry no risks. When I think of associations, when I think of leagues, when I think even of players, they carry no risks. The only people that carry the entrepreneurial risks together with the sport risks is us clubs. We are the ones investing within the industry. We are the ones investing in the infrastructure, in stadiums, in training grounds. We are the ones investing in youth development with our academies. We are the ones investing in increasing the value of the competition. We are actually the only one that invest and take genuine entrepreneurial risks. All the other stakeholders collect and distribute, collect and distribute, collect and distribute. But if one day, one competition, be it a league or be it an international competition, for some reason, it falls into a massive crisis and it drops 30% in revenues, well, it's easy. They'll distribute 30% less resources. In are taking the risks, and in are taking the risks off the pitch and on the pitch. If we fail to qualify to the competition, if we fail to remain within the top division of our country, well, that's a reduction of revenues of 30% to us, and it's tough. We will have to actually face that, and we will have to find ways of facing 30% decrease in revenues with having costs which are pretty much fixed, because most of our costs, a good ratio is 70%, it's players' salaries. So we want to make sure, I want to make sure, that we will be well heard when it comes to drafting the next international calendar, because we are the only ones carrying the risks. And that is what's very much different than 30, 40 years ago, when the industry could have been considered a game. Today, top clubs in top association, but top clubs in any association, are companies with hundreds of employees turning over hundreds of millions, if not tens of millions. And that is a tremendous difference from what football used to be. This is the short term. The long term, we have to make sure that we see the trends. We actually have to make sure that we do not lose on the trends. Much has been said, much has been talked about to what is the behavior of Generation Z and what's the behavior going to be of the next generation. Today, in the decision-making bodies, my peers, be them at ECA, be them at UEFA, are people that are, I would say, at least 50 above. I'm the white fly, being only 42. But we really have to think, what are the kids, what are tomorrow's kids want to see? Will they still want to see sports as we've seen them today, or football, like other sports? If you look at alpine skiing, or if you look at NBA, which is aging, are we going to face some risks? Are kids really going to shift to second or third screen? Is the model that we have in place today what we need to make sure that football remains the #1 sport globally? These are questions that we have to ask ourselves in the long term. In the short term, as I said, the international match calendar and what it drives, it's what worries us in the short term, and we have to make sure that together with the stakeholders, all of them, be them leagues, federations, confederations, broadcasters, commercial partners, agencies, with all of you guys, we make sure we actually come to with an agreed solution as much as possible in order to ensure that the beautiful game will remain the best sport in the world. Thank you very much.
Andrea, thank you very much indeed. Andrea is going to very kindly stick around for a few questions from the audience. We know that this man has to get back to Turin because Juventus are playing Bologna in a couple of days' time, and you guys have all got to prepare, but he's going to stick around for a few questions.
I have to train, you know.
Well, of course. I would hope so, anyway. Thank you very much for that presentation, by the way. Some really interesting take-homes, very broad-ranging, and I'm sure we've all got things to reflect on as a result of that. Andrea ahora va a recibir y responder sus preguntas. Entonces, si tiene alguna pregunta para Andrea, que levante la mano y le pasamos un micrófono inalámbrico. Pero voy a empezar yo aquí en el escenario. So we do have some questions. Please put your hand up if you would like to ask Andrea. And Adrian will come and find you. Where is Adrian? Adrian, can you wave to me, please? ¿Estás a este lado? Aquí estás. Okay. Adrian is ready for you. So please put up your hand. We've got one here. Okay, so this gentleman here will be the first. And then we're going to go to that gentleman there that will be the second. Okay. First question from me, Andrea. You very generously doffed your cap towards La Liga, saying the good work that has been done to promote La Liga internationally. It's a really hot topic at the moment. We had a Supercopa that was taken abroad to Tangier, to Morocco, played between Sevilla and Barcelona. And we also have a debate raging at the moment between different sectors and organizations about the potential prospect of taking a La Liga game to the United States in January. Just give me your general perspective on this topic as a whole.
Well, it's evidently very hot. I mean, a lot of people commenting on that. I think, again, it's business development models. I mean, and it's something that one should be looking at. Super Cups in various associations have already been taken abroad. You can think of Italian. We played in New York. We played in Africa. We played in the Gulf states. It's something that it's easy to be done because it's outside a calendar. When I look about league games played outside your domestic, whatever, your boundaries, I mean, people who do run businesses better than us, and I think of the NFL or I think the NBA, they play away from the United States. So it's something that should be looked at, and I think even though La Liga has been a pioneer for football, it's been a follower for global sports. So it hasn't invented quite anything there. It's just simply looked at what the best in class are doing and tried to replicate that. I think that what's important is it's you should be able to take a few games away. Again, you want to make sure that you reach a global audience, and if you want to reach a global audience, you have to get close to them. That's why for many teams it's very important to play the summer breaks, and we travel to Asia Pacific, and we travel to the United States, or a smaller association will travel within Europe to go and hit where they have potential supporters. I think what's important going forward is that leagues, associations, clubs, FAs and UEFA come together to find a harmonized solution for all, rather than having scattered solutions individually by different leagues, different federations, etc.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned this in your talk, didn't you? Fundamentally, exposure on the global stage is what's important. However, it's taking a common sense approach of dialogue to find the right solution. Okay, great. Right, we're ready with our first question. Please, could you introduce yourself? Tell us your name and where you're from. Please, obviously, Andrea has very kindly given us his time. Let's try and keep the questions sensible, otherwise you get a red card from me. After you.
Good day, Mr. Agnelli, thank you very much for your speech. My name is Maxim, I'm the chairman of Latvian Premier League, and I have a question. You talked about the importance for competitive balance, the importance of the market size. Could be the combination or creating a common championship of small leagues could be the solution for this problem, and can you comment on the third tier UEFA championship for small leagues that was discussed previously?
Yeah, transnational leagues, it's something that's been on the agenda, as you probably know. I mean, then we go and talk on various aspects, and I did leave them out today, but transnational leagues is something that we've been talking about. The good thing is, like, today UEFA is open to discuss various solutions, because it's evident that, coming from Latvia, you need to aggregate potentially other countries in order to make sure that you get a decent market and you start having a decent domestic base to increase the overall value. Out of transnational leagues, then you have the issue of access to various competitions, so it's difficult to find then a specific access to individual countries participating in a transnational league. So if you were to do that, you have to mutuate the concept, and you only access through the transnational league. So the domestic leagues would probably feed into a professional transnational league, but this again is just brainstorming, but it'd be something that would make sense, as in many industries, ultimately, to create more value, you aggregate. And this is valid for services, it's valid for the industries, it's valid for sports as well. If you aggregate, you'll create value, and it's been shown and proved by the aggregation of domestic rights in different leagues. The sum total of individual rights is always less than what the individual clubs were able to produce by themselves, because all the value would have skewed to those top two teams, no matter in what association. So yes, I mean, that's something that should be looked at. I think from a club's perspective, clubs participating in those leagues, it's something they brought forward and are being discussed. Access list, the third competition is giving more participation. Obviously, the decision was driven by the request of clubs to have greater participation in international competitions during the regular season. If we take the overall season, from pre-qualifiers to playoffs, so end of June to end of August, you play potentially 10 games. Now, those teams playing PQ, rarely, they'll hardly ever reach playoffs and qualify, but it's 10 games scheduled at UEFA level, international level, being played from end of June to end of August. Champions League and Europa League, 13, 15 games. So the ratio is 1.5 to 1, if you take Europa League, which is the biggest one, of games being played June to August or September to May. Now, obviously and evidently, clubs that get close, that play in Q2 and Q3, they want to see extra spots to be able to play in the regular season, because that's the one that most of the clubs want to play at. This is a start. I think bringing 16 extra spots, it's positive for the industry. We are in the process of finalizing this with UEFA, so it hasn't been approved as yet, because the debate is how these, now we're talking about the last 2 or 3 spots, how these will be allocated. But I think it's extremely positive. I think it'll give another 16 teams a chance to participate. I think you are creating clusters of similar teams, therefore making the competitions within the individual competitions more interesting, more uncertain, and allowing a club to grow within the system.
Okay, thank you very much. By the way, welcome from Latvia. Just shows just how truly global this event is, so thank you for that question. The next question is over there. Please present yourself. Thank you.
Hello, Andrea. Alejandro Arenas, head of social media of Real Madrid. Thanks for taking the time to come to Madrid. I wanted to ask you about, there is a huge correlation between the performance of the national teams out of the 5 most important leagues, except for Italy. So I would like to know what is your vision in terms of investing in local talent, and what is the importance that clubs have in the national federations?
You head of, sorry?
Head of social media.
Social media. And you want to know about youth development?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Well, this is a tricky question, evidently. It goes down to planning. I was looking at this with the Brazilian World Cup. When you looked at the quarterfinals, you had 4 teams coming from Europe and 4 teams coming from South America. It was the perfect breakup. In Europe, it was about Belgium, England, France. I can't remember the other one, but it was the academies. You know, those countries that have been able to translate into didactical football. So Belgium, Switzerland, they've done tremendous jobs on that front. England has now invested a lot, and I'm curious to see how that will develop in the next 5 to 8 years. Spain has done a lot. Spain has also come out with you know, whatever, one of the best talented generation in the history of football, I would say, because the generation that won World Cup, Euro Cup, had previously won under 15, under 17, under 19, under 20. They won everything there was to win. Italy at the moment, it's been struggling. I mean, I've been talking a lot about Italy, and it's difficult. I don't want to get here to criticize specifically Italy, but certainly what I see is when you go around Italian cities, you don't see kids playing in parks. You don't see kids playing outside. So we've lost that. And we are in the position, in the moment of transitioning to a proper academy. The federation had launched the launch of however many technical federal centers across Italy, and that was only a couple of years ago. So we will see the fruits and the dividends that will pay in the next 5 to 8 years, because that's how much it takes to grow talent. You're not going to have it overnight. In the meantime, the job is left to clubs, and we try to do our best. We invest a lot in it. We have, you know, whatever, our own school, so that, you know, that our talents do not miss. I mean, we also take that as a social responsibility to ensure that those kids who come up the ranks of our youth academy, they're turned, first of all, into responsible men of our society before than football players. If we can actually make football players as well, better. But first of all, we have to make sure that we treat our academy, which has over 600 kids, and we have our social responsibility over these kids to make sure that we educate them and grow them into men. So that's our specific point of view. Italy is a little bit behind. I trust and hope that in the next couple of cycles, as some of the players have said, you know, we shouldn't be looking at the World Cup in 2022, but we should be looking at the World Cup in 2026. In the meantime, gain experience. And these are words that, I mean, I've heard from some of the guys playing in the national team at the moment. That's the kind of sight they have, because they have to grow the next generation.
Thank you very much, Andrea. From Latvia to Real Madrid social media, fantastic. This question down here, and then Adrian, your next question is over there. I'm going to make you run, my friend. I'm sorry about that.
Good morning. It's really excellent presentation. I enjoyed. My name is Dr. Kadhim Al-Abadi. Yeah, I am football researcher, independent. Yeah, I worked all over the world. My question to you is slightly different. You know, FIFA is not the relation between clubs and World Cup. FIFA has intention of extending the World Cup into from 32 teams to 48 or some teams. How do Europe or European clubs see this? I'm not talking about the number of matches. It will be decreased, but at the first level, at the first round, because FIFA is intention has intention to make group of 3. And the group of 3, this will make chaos, because one team, he could play the first 2 games, and his progress will be in the hand of other team. And maybe the other team, he could he has already qualified for the next round, and maybe he goes to the final game with no intention to play. So how do you see it yourself personally? Thank you so much.
I'll be happy to take your concerns to President Infantino next time I see him in terms of the chaos that could be generated. As far as I see it, I mean, here we're talking about the industry. So the number of games is the same, it's just an extra couple of days, plus a number of countries. The country I represent, I am not touched at all by it, because the number of players I release to national teams, it's identical, whether it's 32 or 48 teams. I can only think of Pjanic that we have today, that, you know, with a couple of extra spots in Europe, Bosnia can become a contender, but to us, releasing 15 or 16 players doesn't make much of a difference. In terms of the overall calendar, it's an extra couple of days, same number of games. An extra couple of days, same number of games, so it doesn't really affect us from that end. The format, it's there to be, I mean, it's there to be analyzed. It's about the fans and it's about the stakeholders. Our concern, it's about club competitions. So the way national teams play their competition, we can only look at trends. So if we go back 30 years to the 70s I was talking to you about before, it was 16 and 8 in Eurocup. Now we are 24 and 48. Evidently, there must be some hidden reason to keep on increasing the number of participants, and the hidden reason is most likely voting.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. Thank you, Andrea. We have one final question, the man in the bright blue shirt.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. I think you can see him.
Yeah, morning. This is Ashish from Viva Football Magazine and Football Pilgrimage Tourism from India. My question is, we have a lot of following to European club with fan clubs at all the metro cities. UAE is also rocket high in last few months, 2 reasons we all know. Your impressions about Indian market, quantity and qualitatively?
India has, I mean, it is difficult to actually enter the market, given first and foremost the importance of cricket in that market. I mean, the way you idolize, you know, your cricket players, we actually shrink in Europe the way we idolize our football players. So I mean, first and foremost, it's a tremendously difficult market because of your traditions and your heritage with specifically cricket. India, as China in the past 15, 20 years, has been looked at from all angles of all industries, specifically because of the size. I mean, and we go back to what I was saying before. I mean, the size of India, it's something that if one has a magic wand and can actually enter that market, it would be brilliant. When you started the Indian Super League, there were lots of talks in putting, you know, European franchises within your league. I think from a quantitative point of view, it's still difficult to judge. I think if you look at the history of America, you know, MLS, the way it started back 30, 40 years ago, it's still where it is. I mean, it's picking up a little bit, but we're talking 40 years, you know, 30 years, 40 years down the path. India will probably have to be similar to that. Qualitatively, I mean, I think there's room for improvement, if I have to be honest. I mean, there's no point saying that we're going to have hoarding, we're going to have European clubs hoarding Indian players in the next couple of seasons, but that is something that you should do. Discipline, it's there. India is a tremendously creative country. I mean, the mind that one finds in India, it's difficult to find them elsewhere. Right? It's a matter of whether you believe in your domestic product first than us believing in India as an international market.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to leave it there because Andrea's got to rush off. We've also got another session coming straight after this. But maybe think about investing in a Juventus cricket team. If you want to hit that Indian market, maybe
yes,
that might be
we're open to all
ideas. He's smiling. He likes the idea. Look, thumbs up. Listen, apologies, we cannot have any more questions. We've simply run out of time. But please, everyone, show your appreciation. Un fuerte aplauso para el presidente.
Muchas gracias.
Andrea Agnelli.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Enjoy the 2 days of work. Bye-bye.